Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our last online session with Shell this week. It's our live online career panel, and we have a real treat in store for you this evening. We've got two panelists here that have had a great career with Shell in lots of different business areas, and our aim really is to showcase to you their career journeys, and hopefully they will inspire you to make some future career choices. So let's kick this session straight off and tell you that this session is being recorded. It is approximately for 60 minutes. We'll be talking on a panel for 45 with the view to open up questions to the floor using the chat function for the last 15 minutes. So if you've got any questions that are burning inside of you, please hold off, make a note of them, pop them into the chat. So let's start off with you, Phil. Can you introduce yourself, tell the audience your name, your job title, and also what does data mean to you?
Sure. Hi, Rachel, and hi, everyone. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak today. So I work for Shell as the Mobility Chief Data Officer, and I really look after anything data within what we call our mobility business. And that really is the retail stations that we have behind me, or the forecourts, and we've got various terms for it. And you'll find that throughout, particularly in Shell, we've got loads of terms for actually the same thing. But I look after the retail sites, but we're moving into electric vehicles and charging. But I wear a couple of other hats as well. So I look after B2C, and that actually in technical jargon, or I translate that from technical jargon, is really any consumer related activity. So that might be, we've also got a home energy business too. And I also look after our fleets business, all from a data perspective. And really my key role is about making sure that actually I understand the business strategy, but then can convert it into what that means from a data perspective. And it's really doing it two ways. One, looking back at the business and saying this is what data can do for you, and have you thought about it, and looking at governance, but then also to looking at the other way and taking what the business want to do and making sure the IT teams and the data teams understand that as well.
Fantastic. That sounds like a very, very busy role. So what does data mean to you, Phil?
Well, I think as you'll find out through my career, data to me is a bit of the lifeblood of how industry, how society actually works. So that sounds pretty big to me, but I think data is just this wonderful thing that actually gives you insight into how business and the world really runs. And so for me, that can apply across the board, and Shell's just one example of that.
Fantastic. Fleur, can you introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about your role within Shell, and tell us what data means to you, please.
Sure, happy to do so. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Floor, and I work as a business advisor to the group CIO of Shell. So the group CIO basically looks after all IT, a lot of technology, a lot of digital, and a lot of data in Shell. And I'm his right hand to make sure that he's prepared for the meetings. He comes to the right audiences, speaks with his leadership team, and with that, I also am involved in quite some strategy work and facilitation of events. I think data. Also, if I look at it personally, data is very interesting, and it will tell you answers to questions you didn't even know you had. So from a business point of view, you can use data to enrich your the decisions that you're making, but also to find out new patterns and actually know things that you could not know with the bare head, no matter how much you have studied. I think that is just really cool, and we're only scratching the surface of everything that data can bring us. And I try to work with data personally as well, just to keep an eye on what my energy usage is at home. And basically it's everywhere, and very interesting, I could say.
Absolutely, and an absolutely booming career vertical. I think we can add to that as well. So Phil, let's kick off with you with the first question. You studied mechanical engineering at university, and after graduation you joined British Airways. Can you tell us how your first role inspired the first steps of a data career for you?
Yeah, and pleasure. And I think it's probably fair to say that I sort of accidentally fell into data. It wasn't something I'd gone through university and thought, oh, I'm going to become a data geek, as I like to call myself. Yeah. So that's why I think it's so important to come to these sort of opportunities and share a little bit about how I got into it and why I love it. So as you mentioned, I worked for British Airways, and I was lucky enough to be sponsored by them when I was doing my degree. And that meant I could drop in and drop out over the summers and actually start to understand how a company worked, because at that stage I'd really no idea. Yeah. I was, as you mentioned, training as a mechanical engineer. And so after graduation, I went and worked in their engineering supply chain department. And I was actually looking after landing gear, so the bits that fall off the air, or not fall off, but enable you to land, yeah. But also to their flat tracks and carriages, which sounds, quite interesting. And as part of that, I found that role quite interesting because it was both a technical something or other, which was satisfying my need around the equipment and actually how it worked and how a plane worked. So that was my engineering brain. But actually what I was really involved in was the logistics of overhauling these landing gear. So you take one off every 10 years, they get serviced and repaired and overhauled. But after about 6 months, I was getting a bit bored because I'd done like 4 years worth of studying and quite detailed information on detail. But obviously in a job, when you transition out, you've got to learn a lot of stuff. But equally, the first jobs can be quite, repetitive. And therefore, I wanted to do something else. I was a bit amazed, though, even at that stage in what was 2000, so it seems like eons ago now. But there was basically an A4 ring binder that allowed us to try and track where these landing gear were. Yeah. And I should stress there was no air assurance risk there. But the key thing was that this ring binder actually enables us to track progress. And we constantly wanted to ask questions of where bits were and whatever. And we were sort of thumbing through and wasting all this time. So I thought, as I had a bit of spare time, I'd actually create a bit of a database. So it was very small. I'd not done it before, but I just thought, well, this was a sort of perfect thing to do. And so the first thing I would say is sometimes you get the opportunity, you've got a bit of an angle of what you should do, go ahead and just take advantage and do it. And the thing was that after about 6 months, my senior manager noted that we got this great database developed and we could do these insights. And he'd seen my interest in data and how we could use it. And he said, well, we're actually about to replace 200 systems in engineering. I think it'd be quite good that you actually got involved in it and led some of the training because you've clearly got an interest. And at the time, I thought, not really sure I want to be a trainer, to be honest, but it might be quite interesting. Little did I know it 6 months later that actually it was probably the kickstart for what has now become a data career. And I was a bit of a kid in a sweet shop, to be honest, because I realized what it actually enabled me to do was to look at all the parts of the organization, how it worked, and data was basically a pair of binoculars that could see everything that happened. So I was, as you know, an engineer. I was interested in how old the aircraft were, how many landings they'd done, how long they were in the air for, how long it had taken to fly from A to B. I could get all of that from a system, and I could see what defects they'd got and how many seats were failed. Yeah. So it was just this whole world that I'd not thought of before. And what I realized was that data provided access to absolutely everything that you could want to know about a company. And that if you grab data, you can see how business ran, and also too why it didn't, let's be honest. And for me, actually, data is really, in a way, engineering, but brought into the 21st century, because data is all about making sure 1 + 1 = 2, just as making sure on that aircraft that actually the right components are fitted so you have a safe journey. So that was a little bit of how I sort of got interested in data.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I've got one quick question off the back of that one as well, is that you mentioned
Sure.
that you were doing sort of internships, placements, etc., so that you could get that kind of piece of key experience, which, for me as an ex-recruiter is always really important when you see it on a CV, which is exactly why I've created the Digdata program, to give this exposure to students across the UK and internationally. But for you, as somebody that I guess, hires staff now across all levels, if you were to look at somebody that had come out of university or out of college and was looking to do an apprenticeship or a graduate scheme, and you had two CVs in front of you, one of which had an internship Pretty much, it didn't necessarily have to be anything related to Shell or related to the actual job, but had actually gone out of their way to kind of apply some curriculum learning. How would you view that as opposed to a CV that doesn't have that?
Well, I think there are a couple of things probably, but the first one is to show that you're actually sort of going out there, you want to get some skills, you're interested, you're looking at your career. So I think that's the first one. So I think you're really putting yourself out there and pushing it rather than waiting for things to come towards you. So that would be the first one. So I know that you're really engaged. And the second one is actually, as I mentioned to start with, when I first started, I had no idea how a company worked. And the transition from an educational environment to a commercial one is something we all go through. It's a bit like when you first become a line manager, there's a whole load of skills that you suddenly need to pick up. So even just doing a little bit of that is great. And maybe just because you've asked that question, I did when I was 13 a bit of work, let's say, a magazine publisher, because that was when my grandfather worked. And I ended up writing a couple of articles, and I came across the magazine probably a month ago that I wrote.
Wow.
And I was like, "My God!"
Cool.
And it was a furniture magazine, so I had no background, nothing like that. But actually, I went through and I thought, "Wow, for a 13-year-old, that wasn't bad." But again, it was just I could put that on my CV. So then, when I applied to British Airways, again, I was able to show how I'd actually used a bit of it. So I just think it's just making sure you get out there, take the opportunity you have. I can't encourage it even more than that.
Definitely. And I think actually for anybody that is, a student and is starting to go to interviews either for full-time permanent positions, is actually any experience that you get, right, is a really good opportunity to talk about it at interview, whether you've it's in the same industry, whether to talk about the skills that you've gained, things that you weren't so good at, things you need to improve on. It kind of opens it up and exposes you in good and bad ways, I guess. Flo, let's move on to you.
Maybe I could just add one part there, which was
sure.
to say, as you mentioned, interviews. I think the other part is take the interview as well. So even if it's not quite the job you want, get some practice in too, because then you will refine some of your answers. So.
Absolutely that. And I think, again, having been a recruiter in the past, it's you either get somebody who loves interviews or doesn't. So if you've got something that you can actually talk about, it becomes far easier, I guess, when you're talking about an experience. Flor, let's ask you a question now. What would be your advice to anyone in the audience who doesn't feel after their studies ready to go straight into a career, but is worried about how that might look on their CV to a future employer?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I can relate to that as well because I took 2 gap years before starting my career at Shell. I think what is important is however you spend your time, and this relates to what Phil said as well, is getting the bits and pieces of experience. Make sure you do something that adds to your experience. So sitting on the couch for a year is not going to look very good on your CV. However, you don't need to be sitting in university in a college hall as the only and solely experience. So what I think is important, have an idea how you want to spend that few months or that year, what you want to learn. And if you're filling it with an internship or with some travel or with learning a language course in a different country or pursuing one of your great hobbies and taking a next step in that, doesn't really matter how you spend it, but make sure you think about it well, spend it wisely, and be able to explain why you choose to dedicate a few months or a year towards that. And then I think it only helps you to enrich your CV, to make yourself, express yourself as a unique individual. And that's going to help you speaking over in the interview as well.
Absolutely. And I think, to have sometimes, like you say, if you're not necessarily working for that whole year, you do need to have some sort of amount of focus, right? Because we all know that days and weeks go into months, months go into years, and it is very difficult to explain how you've kind of spent that time. But to have a focus of whatever that is, I think is certainly now with future employers is something that they admire if you've gone traveling or if you want to do that or you want to pursue that area. But it's being mindful of and accountable for that time. Phil, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of kind of culture and environment now, because I think, certainly it's not always been the top of the list when students particularly are looking for their first employer, but actually it's probably one of the most important things for people to flourish, right? So you took a consultancy role in the public sector in the early stages of your career. How valuable was this for you to realise how important how culture and environment is of the business for you to progress and to succeed?
Yeah, so I think great question. So I think when I look back at my early career and I was in a session a bit like this, people come on and say, oh, it's all great and this was my career and this is where I achieved it. So I'm going to be really honest and tell you about where I went wrong in my career as well. So it doesn't always come over as being, it's all easy. So as you know, I work for British Airways. It was just around 9/11, so that was in 2001. It was quite early in my career. Basically, all of the airlines were consolidating. It's a bit like COVID, if you like, but 20 years ago. As a consequence, really, there were no opportunities for me to grow. So I had a look around. Perhaps I was a bit naive, but I've been working with a lot of consultants on the project. I love what they did. I love their intellect and that cultural side. I really enjoyed. So actually, I had a friend who had just joined a consultancy, and I decided to move. Yeah. I was a bit naive. I didn't do very much sort of interrogation. You just think, oh, it's easy to move, job done. But there were a few challenges I found, one of which working in the public sector was I wasn't actually in control of the work I was doing. I was working for a consultant and they said, oh, you're going off here. So, and I won't mention where it was, but I just didn't find the work particularly interesting. Yeah. And there's a lot about it. You need to find that work interesting. The people are absolutely lovely. Yeah, really nice people. I remember having some great chats with them. So the people were lovely, but getting stuff done was super challenging. And if you want to go, the reason why I left BA was actually because I wanted to go off and do things and grow and whatever else. And I was getting a bit frustrated on that side. And then the third part, as I mentioned, I just wasn't in control of what I did, where I worked. And for me, I just realized that there were 3 or 4 things that actually really meant a lot to me. So what I wanted to say here was that I always want to have some degree of certainty of what I'm doing and where I'm going. So just have a bit of a think about, don't go into it all blasé and just say, oh, it'll be fine. Do have a bit of a check and do use that. And for me, it was great. And actually, it was really good early on to learn those things. And sometimes you have to learn them and realize that. And it was super challenging at the time, but I learned so much about myself and what I didn't want to do. And I think when you come out of university or you're trying to think about a career, it's almost impossible to get it right. Yeah. So do it. But what I would do is encourage you to do it early in your career so that if it's not right, it's easy to move across. Doing it later on and making a mistake, it's much more difficult. But think of it as a valuable learning experience.
I think, when you come out of university, it is literally like a needle in a haystack. Oh, where do I go? What do I do? Because everything's been quite sort of routine and sort of planned. And it's always an easier solution to work out what you don't want to do, what you don't like. Actually identifying what you do like or what you're good at or where you might sit is always a difficult one. So thank you for that advice. That's excellent. Fleur, let's go over to you. You've worked across many different areas of business at Shell in an array of job roles and in different countries. What is it that keeps you intrigued in discovering what is possible at Shell?
So I relate this a lot to what someone once told me. I was in university and I didn't really know how to understand that or how to translate that. But this person told me, he said, your career, at the start of your career, you get an empty shopping cart. And you can fill it with what you actually like yourself, what you want to do and what you want to learn. So everyone has their own favorite dish. So we're not all cooking spaghetti tonight. And that's okay. But it's important that you know what you like and you learn that along the way by tasting different things, by making new combinations. And for me, I see that a lot. And my career in Shell, I see it almost as a treasure hunt, where in every job I can do or I get an opportunity to do to learn something new. I follow my instinct going to these roles. And when I think, hey, this job, I can bring something, I can improve something, but on the same time, I can also learn something myself. I'm quite intrigued to go and explore that and to see how that works. So after around 8.5 years in Shell now, I can tell you my shopping cart is doing quite well. It's growing and growing. And but it's not full yet. So I'm still happy to explore more and different opportunities.
So the flavour you started with and the flavour you've got now is just enhanced, I guess, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I'm becoming a pretty good cook now. So
Well, that's yet again another skill to put on the CV.
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
So that leads us on nicely, I guess, to talk about your role as a business advisor to the CIO. Are you able to share with us, an overview of your role and what you love the most about it, aside from cooking, of course?
Yeah. Well, sometimes I bring cakes to meetings. That's you'll gain a lot of friends with that. No, but that joke apart, I looking at this job, I think it consists of three things. So think, care, and do. I have to think about the strategy of the company, and specifically our IDT, or Information and Digital Technology Organization, and how you best communicate that. Because even if you have the best idea and some beautiful data to back it up with, if people don't believe it, if people don't understand, and if people don't live it, it's useless, right? So really how to create that strategy and bring it to the organization, that's a good part of my job. Then there's actually quite a big care element in it. And that's an element that you won't read in any job description. But after all, I need to make sure that our CIO can do his job at best. So I need to take care of him, the rest of the leadership team. And sometimes that's organizing events, making sure everyone reaches a place on time. And also it's just making sure that they have a glass of water as soon as they seem thirsty, or whether you need to hand over a gum or a mint whenever they need that. So quite a big care element of it as well. And then I have to do a lot of things, some small, some big, but I never know how my day is going to evolve throughout the day, because there's always urgent things. There's always things that take a different turn. And I actually quite like that, because that means it's very diverse, it's very dynamic. And I can sometimes have the opportunity to actually join on a trip, visiting our tech partners, our vendors, traveling places, visiting our refineries. So that's really cool, and never a dull moment. I think what I really like is the combination of these three elements, because I'm a person that likes to do a lot of different things. So far, I think it's one of the coolest jobs I've had because of that diversity. But I'm of course gonna try and find a job that is even cooler than this one. So I'm not done my search yet.
I have every faith that you will do that as well, Fleur, because I think I'm in agreement with you that, obviously running Digdata, no day is the same, and the day that you think you've got planned quite often is not right at all. But I quite like that, being tested actually, and kind of feeling like you're achieving on the spot, which is quite cool. So Phil, since you graduated, data's become a career vertical that has grown massively. Why do you think data analytics is an exciting career to pursue? I know you talked about earlier about what data means to you, but why now? Why should people in the audience really consider this as, a next step?
Yeah, so I think part of it I've covered as well, but let me recap a little bit too. So I think it's really a skill that you learn by doing, yeah. And I describe it a bit like that engineering apprentice when I was at university. So you learn your trade, but then you can apply it to so many different applications. So it is, if you think about it, a bit like, let's say, a builder or an electrician or something like that. It's got a specific skill set, but then they could go off and build a house, a factory, a palace even, yeah. And I think that's really where the data skill comes in, because what you learn is the trade about what goes wrong with data, what goes right, and you've got an instinct. And when I started 20 years ago, I thought, I don't know how that guy who's my age now perhaps knows to go there straight away and answer that question, or why do they go there? So it is definitely a skill and a trade. But for me, what I think is really exciting, it's about you can apply it to so many different situations. And when I'm listening to Fleur's response there, and I'm thinking, crikey, even though I work for Shell, the diversity of things that we cover, I can just drop into any of those with a data skill set and probably add value. Maybe not Fleur, so don't call me tomorrow. But there we go. But my point there really is I can take that trade and I can apply it everywhere. And probably the best way I can finish the answer off is to show a couple of the things I've learned over the last 2 years. So in the last 2 years, being the mobility CDO, some of the things that I've learned about is data privacy, yeah, the consumer rights, GDPR, which is all about protecting consumers' rights. But I've also learned about the energy transition, so EV. I now know how solar panels work and a home energy solution, but also too, I've learned about how actually the infrastructure, the national grid in the UK actually load balances. I mean,
Wow.
if you told me a year ago that I would be getting into how actually the government manages and the power generators, the balancing of that, I would have smiled at you and said you were on something. I don't know, but so I've only got into that conversation because data as a skill set has enabled me to have that conversation, and I just learn about everyday business and life. Yeah, and I just think that's fascinating. And what else would you want to do?
Definitely. And I think, it's evolved so significantly as a career vertical. It's opened up a breadth of different skills that required. I think everybody always associates a career in data as being somebody who's, a mathematical genius. And yes, of course, there's roles that are incredibly technical and require that. There's also a lot of roles that don't and require lots of other kind of key skills, which I think makes it very exciting. I think it's also a career vertical now that, like you say, it's in every industry. So if you've got a real passion for something or a real interest, actually coming to the table with that kind of knowledge and then sprinkling it with a bit of data, could be incredible for any business, and for your own sort of passion and interest, I guess. Again, Phil, you've worked across many different business services shells as well, including the trading floor to manufacturing to forecourts. And we've probably touched on this a little bit, and this might be a hard question for you to ask, right? But what do you think is the most enjoyable role you've done to date, and why? And if your boss is on the call, I'm guessing you're going to have to say your current one.
Well, actually, it makes it easy because you shared this question in advance, and I was just like, that's probably the easiest question to answer, and it is my current one. But let me explain why it is. Yeah, data actually is something that I've got a passion for, but a lot of other people don't have a passion.
No.
But in working at Shell, one of the challenges probably I did find when I initially started was working in trading, for example. Trading is about derivative contracts. That basically means I've got a bit of paper that says I'm going to buy or sell some crude oil or some products like fuel. And I like to be quite practical. That's coming back to, I think, probably to my engineering brain. And I was trying to relate to all of this, and I found it really quite hard to do. But the thing I love about what I'm doing now in the mobility space is every single one of you on a call has probably bought something on Amazon, certainly goes to a shop, does that. And so what I can now do is I can explain data in completely relatable scenarios. And I think this is a really strong skill set for anybody to try and develop and have. It's a bit of storytelling. And if you can actually start to say, right, okay, this is try and take an analogy of everyday life to explain something, that's a really super powerful way of engaging with people. And the reason I love this job now is actually because every time I want to explain something, I can explain it in a business context, but actually I say, imagine you're driving to the forecourt and you're filling up your car, or you're charging your car, or you're ordering a product or whatever. Guess what? Everybody can, because everybody does it, or they've been in a car or whatever. And that's why I love my job now, because actually I can talk about it, explain, and put people really where they are on the forecourt in the process.
Yeah.
And then I can explain about data and the consequences. And that's why I love today's role.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's it's so wonderful to talk to people that are enthused about the career that they're in. Flor, there have been times in both your education and career journey where you have not been successful. How did you, or do you, deal with this in a positive manner?
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. And I like to feel opening up on that as well earlier, that it's not just all going great, a successful step after successful step. When I actually graduated from high school, I was very sure that I wanted to go to hospitality school. And I wanted to learn how to do things and not just study the theory behind it. So I applied and I didn't get in. So that was a really big disappointment because I knew that was what I wanted to do. But then I thought, okay, I need to go and choose something else. So I decided to pursue my studies at university, just see how it would go, and I could always reapply a year later. Now, looking back, I'm so happy I didn't get in hospitality school, because if I would have done that, I would never ever have gotten this job. And actually, this job has a lot of the elements that I wanted to learn there anyway as well. So that specific moment when I was the age of 18 really learned me that if some things happen differently or not how you were planning to do them, it happens for a better reason. In other words, if I guess it disappointed if plan A fails, I'm actually quite confident that plan B was going to be better, but I just don't know yet how it evolves. Now, and even in my current job, I applied for this job around 3 years ago as well. So people do these jobs for 2 years. So the previous round that it was available, I applied for it too. I didn't get it. And I was disappointed, but not for very long, because this learning from my university time, I thought, no, I think it's for the better that I didn't land this job now. COVID happened, and my predecessor has done this job 2 years, completely virtual, haven't traveled anywhere, haven't spent time together with our boss, didn't drink much coffee together. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, I'm so happy I got this job 2 years later, because I'm now dialing in from Houston, sitting next to the big boss. And that wasn't possible a few years ago. So always keep this in the back of your mind. And sometimes you don't know quite what the plan B or C is. But looking back, it might have been for a better reason that you got declined for something.
Absolutely.
And I think, Flor, yeah, I was just going to say that you might feel it's a bit of a rejection. But I think most people that apply for some of those roles, it's amazing because you've put your name on someone's radar. And they then go, oh, but actually you'd be really good for this as well. Yeah. So actually, but again, it's almost back to my earlier comment. If you put yourself out there, people say, oh, you're out there, you're interested, da, 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 da. And then you'll be amazed at what doors open.
Absolutely. And I guess also, let's be totally honest, we've hit the nail on the head. Where you start and where you end up, it's all about kind of the journey, right? It's not always about landing in every kind of port. It's about the journey and the experience that you get to pick up to then maybe go off road. I've got one last question, Flora, and I think we touched on it a little bit. Is your current role your dream job, or have we got more shopping to put in that trolley?
Well, I think dream job is a bit like a prince on the white horse, and I have an amazing husband, but he's not a prince on the white horse. And I think a dream job is quite similar to that. So every single job, and I think Phil will relate, being in his almost dream job now as well, will have bits and pieces that you don't like to do. I'm not sure how it's with everyone on the call, but who loves brushing teeth? I've not come across someone that actually loves doing that, but we all do it. And every job will have bits and pieces of work that you just don't like to do. Now, what is important is to balance that. Find out what is your passion, find out what you like to do, and make sure you find a job that has as much of these elements. Because if you find something that you love to do and you have things you must do in the same job, and that overlaps, you are having a great job.
Exactly that.
And then I think that is very important. But that also means that you need to find out for yourself what it is that drives you, what you actually like to do. Because if you don't know it for yourself, you cannot search for it, and you're not going to find a job that actually has all of these elements. So explore it, see what you're interested in, see what you currently like in your university or in your school, see what kind of things you like. Do you like things being messy? Do you like cleaning up things? Do you like being outside? What is it that makes you thrive? Try and find that in a job, and make sure you balance it as much as possible, that the must do and the love do are both in the same place.
Wowza. I've got to say, if I had the opportunity to sit on a panel like this when I was in secondary school, college, or even university, I think my journey could have been somewhat smoother. because actually my dream job, or so I thought, was to be a buyer for Caramillan. But the irony was I failed the maths test, and I thought my life was, and my career was ruined forever. But then I realised that I was a pretty good salesperson and had a successful career doing that. So I guess you do, sometimes you find out what skills you have when cards are on the table and you need to pick them up and move forward. So I've noticed throughout this session that we've had quite a few bits and pieces come into the chat. I haven't been ignoring you, I promise. I just thought the conversation was flowing so nicely that we should carry that on. So let's go right back to the beginning. I know there's been some very inspirational questions. Okay, so let's go right back. We've got Shama. Are your personal projects considered as an experience? And I think that was relaying back to Phil when we were talking about internships on CVs. If somebody's working on a personal project, let's just argue and date relate this, that they've worked on a Digdata Shell live career challenge, they put it on their CV and they develop it out past the time. Is that something that you want to see on a CV?
Oh, definitely, because it's showing and there's some commitment. I'll be honest, I was interested and I was had a little business when I was 12 repairing lawnmowers, because I wanted to know how engines worked. I put that on my CV originally because it showed I made a bit of money, I was a bit entrepreneurial, etc. So, put something on, but recognize when you need to drop it off. So I wouldn't put that on today, to be honest. But
really? Okay, that's not one of your key skills, no?
No, well, it is still a skill, but I probably wouldn't trade on it.
Ones.
No.
Fantastic. So this is Afansa has said, but what if your gap year is for family problems? So isn't on something that we can focus on positively. I mean, personally, I would say, as long as you can account for your time, then that's something that you can discuss, albeit limited with your prospective employer. What do you both feel about that?
I think to me, it's very important that even if it is a gap year for that kind of reasons, make sure you call it out, because then it's not a gap. It's actually a year very well spent on taking care of a family member or taking care of a family situation. I would love that, because that means you're a very caring person. You're probably a really good team player because you don't leverage your own luck and happiness over that of others. So I think even a situation like that tells a lot about yourself as a person. And that's what you're looking at a resume. You're looking at the story behind that person. And this is a piece of that story that tells a lot about you. And to me, it would always be in favor of you if you make that dedication.
Absolutely. And I guess that is something that you consider as important as their journey up until that point, right? Phil, have you got anything you want to add to that?
I don't think I can, to be honest.
No, I know. She absolutely smashed that.
So you've definitely smashed that. But I would just like to emphasize having a gap on your CV is a big question mark when I look at people's CV. So making sure you acknowledge it. And that is what is really important. But it also means that if you do take some time out, you need to be able to justify it and explain it. And something longer than 6 months, I would suggest. You really need to have something there for it not to then raise an eyebrow.
But certainly, don't worry about it, as long as you are acknowledging it. Okay, so I grasped from Phil that one could develop interest in data analysis irrespective of one's university course of study. Please, how can I start as an administrator to develop my interest in big data analysis? Benjamin, just out of interest, can you put in the chat what you're studying at the moment? Is it a sort of STEM-based subject, or that might be a way forward? Let's just play this question like it's not. Okay, it's completely kind of out there. What would your advice be, Phil?
Yeah, so actually, I think there were a number of similar questions when I reviewed it in the chat window, which were all about, I'm in this background or I'm doing this, but I'd like to look at data. I think what I would be looking for if you want to get into data is being, a bit of a go-getter. That's part of it, but you would look at that for all jobs. I think the thing that distinguishes it or would make me be interested is if you've got a bit of a logical brain. So data is all about logic, really. How do things hang together? How do they connect? Again, why I mention engineering, because it's all about how these parts work together. Now, that might mean you're a champion in Sudoku, or you might do those puzzles. I'm being a bit extreme there, but to me, sure, physics, maths, those sort of careers, so STEM type subjects are definitely your normal way. What I would then look at, if you're not doing a STEM subject, and maybe that's where Benjamin's coming from, then actually you can bring data into a lot of what you already do. So I use that example of engineering and landing gears and a database. You know, I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities where you can bring a data lens to what you're doing in your normal job and demonstrate that, and then bring that and highlight that in your CV, or highlight that in a covering letter, or bring it into the interview. You then demonstrated it, but in a different way. So I wouldn't be too hung up on about it, but you need some experience if that degree or if that subject doesn't really cover it. Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. And there, I'm going to do a shameless plug now, I'm afraid, which is exactly why Digdata was created, to give students the opportunity to work on business problems using data to solve it. And actually, for the university-based students, we have a data strategy task and a data science task to lend itself to students that have got or are working with data within their course, and some that aren't but want to apply it. Again, you know, for the younger students on the call, we've got 2 student cohorts for secondary school and college as well. And it's a great opportunity to actually see what you enjoy about solving that problem. If there's nothing you enjoy about it, then I think that you've come up with the answer that perhaps data and a career in that is not the right way. But actually, if it's the storytelling of it, if it's the creativity behind it, if it's really delving deeper and being a detective, if it's somebody that's writing code, you're really leaning in to a skill that is going to be something that you can discuss again at interviews, but actually then start you know, really focusing your search in roles that will lend themselves to that. So, you know, everyone here is digdata.online. We've got all our live events coming up. We've got our library resource with all the organisations we work with, including our events for Shell. So get involved and get some work experience and see if it is something that works for you. Okay, we've got here, okay, so we've got Linda here. She's doing quite a lot of advisory stuff for us, I'm very pleased to say. Look for data careers. I'm sure you have many skill sets already. Always look at the job description and you may be surprised. Yeah, I think she's absolutely right. Also, job specs are very much an overview. They're a little bit like Christmas lists. When somebody says, what do you want for Christmas? And you say, yeah, I don't want anything. And then you go, actually, no, I do. Oh, and then I want, and then that person doesn't exist, by the way. And what you need to do is look at it as a guide and not as a Bible. Because actually, you know, there's be lots of things on there that you can bring to the table in the dynamic of yourself. So don't always not apply because you don't hit every mark on a job specification. Okay, so we've got these words are literally giving me a lot of hope, and I feel good that I've got some clear idea for my doubts. That's good. See, we've inspired one person this evening. Good work, Phil and Flor. I was told once, always have a plan A. When you have exhausted plan A, find another plan A. Well, I think we talked about that being a plan B. That's fine. As a career professional, what tips would you offer to students in terms of what is data careers? Well, I think, Phil, Flora, I think we can all say that actually the careers that exist right now probably didn't exist when you guys were graduating and job searching. I think we can safe to say that for a number of students on the call tonight, when they go to start job searching, those roles will probably have changed in terms of names. So I would say just focus on the advice that you've had tonight, which is, you know, look out for what you enjoy and what you're good at. Flo, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, maybe what is good to add is just what are the kind of the type of starting roles that you can do in data, right? Because there's quite a variety on that. And I think looking at that, there's 3 big areas in data. One is data analysis, one is data engineering, and one is data science. And I would tell all of you to have a go and a Google on what these different things means, because data analysis is much more on the side, going through the data set, seeing what the business actually means, what is the content behind the data, and what you can actually get out of it from an insight. Data engineering is building the tools to get that data out, and data science is really exploring, researching ways to get to the specific data sets that you eventually need. So give that a go, because not every data job is the same. And right now there is a diversity on it, and I'm probably missing out of 15 other different terms in the data field, but give that some thought, because make sure you land where your passion lies, and don't just apply for anything that hits at top on Google when you type in data career.
No, exactly. Phil, have you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I like the description of the 3 pillars, Fleur. What I would do, because I used to recruit people into data engineering and data scientists, etc. Personally, I feel that people are very attracted to the term data scientist. That's what they want to go out and do. Yeah. And actually, it's probably got slightly better pay than the others. Yeah. But I think you really need skills from doing data analysis and data engineering first, because you really need to come back to what I describe as that engineering apprentice trade. You need to roll up your sleeves. You need to understand why data is bad. Yeah. Let's be honest, the majority of data isn't of great quality.
No.
Now, data scientist has a skill set that enables them to start to look at data and look for where things are obviously wrong and exclude it. But if you come out of school or university or something like that and go straight in and think you want to do that, I think personally you need to get a bit more of the street cred, if you like, and that life skills around data. I would urge you to look at the first 2 with a view then to going on to being a data scientist. So I would just add that.
Great. And I think also one thing to add is that, you know, just if a career doesn't have the terminology analyst or scientist or technician, the likelihood is it's going to involve, you know, a degree of data anyway. So I think this is really positive that people are embracing this and actually can see the value of, you know, how it can sort of make decisions daily. I'm studying data science in the UK. How can I join Shell as a graduate? Now, I think probably this is a careers question. So what, I don't know if you guys have any answers or whether you'd rather I direct this candidate to sort of shell.com and their careers page so that they can find out a little bit more information. Would that be better? Best approach?
Yeah, you'll find most there. I joined as a graduate myself and I just applied online. Usually there's no fixed timelines when you can join. But I also would really encourage to do an assessed internship before. So either via a selection day or via an internship, you'll get into the graduate program. But if time allows, do that internship, because then you get to know Shell, whether you see a fit, and they get to know you. And that's a great way to find if you want to do a career there.
What a fantastic. I know I've just noticed that actually Chloe's shared the link there into the chat, which is great. So if anybody else wants to look at that, that's fine. We'll also be putting that onto when we add this session into our library resource. It'll be topped and tailed, and there'll be some careers links for you guys to have a look at as well. So watch the space. That'll be up and running next week. Okay, so we've answered pretty much most of these questions. Let me just have a look now. Benjamin, you were right. He was doing a master's in business administration with professional placement. So again, maybe if Shell is of interest, have a look at those kind of internship and placement opportunities. Let's go now for one more question. Let's have a look.
Iraj is, if I've got it right, has asked quite an interesting question. Do you think the data industry will have drastic changes in the next 10 years? And if so, what do you have to keep in mind? So let's do a bit of future gazing.
Okay.
Maybe the best way to answer it is to actually go back 10 years. Yeah.
That's a good
but
idea.
If I went back 10 years, there was no big data platform particularly.
No.
And if I go back 20 years, things like a wide, what we call an enterprise resource platform or ERP, so the things that do all the balance sheets and the finances, they were only really just starting to exist. Yeah. Now that's been replaced. Everything now has gone from what we call on-prem, so large computers, if you like, in companies' premises. You've probably heard about the cloud and how AWS and Azure have moved. Well, that's now de rigueur. That's the standard. Software has moved from being typically built in-house. It's now moved more towards software as a service. So they're some of the principles that we have. And if I look then at people's awareness, back to the consumer space around data privacy and, gee, I'm giving you all this data, what are you doing with it? And you can see my life, and you see all these things about Apple and Google and tracking and all this stuff. The general populace has become much more educated. And then in the last couple of months, we've got OpenGPT and the chatbot industry, if you like, that's springing up. Now, that's just the last 20 years. But we can see that the things have accelerated quite a lot faster. Now, for me, it's all about actually leveraging that data, but making sure you do it in a way that people have given permission. because I think that's going to become really important. It's people are aware increasingly of the value of their data, but therefore have we given them permission to do that? But actually, if you think about what that chatbot does, is that chatbot potentially is actually going to be able to get all these insights. We've got some machine learning that's coming on, and that's really what that's about. But therefore, the sky's the limit in a way. And the challenge, I think, is going to be doing it and constraining some of that so that people still feel in control, because there is a bit of a sense, I guess, really, where things start to get a bit out of control in a way, and that we're getting all sorts of insights and bombarded. And I think my last comment would be, we are going to get overwhelmed with data. We already are overwhelmed with data. And in Shell now, I'm known as the frothy coffee man. And what I mean by that is actually, I use it as an analogy. So if you imagine coming to a retail site, we've got a coffee. You can imagine you've got a nice frothy coffee that sits on the counter. There's loads of data that we actually need to deliver our products to you. But as a consumer, when I want to engage with you, I've only got a fairly limited amount that I need to know about you. And what I think the biggest challenge we're going to have is, how do we sift out from that all that data we have, what's the real key nuggets of information? And therefore, my analogy of the frothy coffee is what sits in the froth, which is really important, and how do we bring that and action against it? Because I think people's expectations are getting higher and higher, but how do we filter that up? So to me, they would be some of the changes in the next 10 years.
Wowza. Flo, have you got anything to add to that?
No. Leave
No.
it to the data expert.
You must
I leave it to the data.
with the CIO. Come on.
I'm happy with the froth. You know, I'm
No, it
absolutely
is
sold on that.
going. I can add actually one thing to it. It is going. It's growing exponentially. We have to become more smart about it, put more tools towards it, but more data isn't necessarily better. Amazon, Amazon Web Services, that houses a lot of data, needs additional electricity every year, the size of Ireland, in order to maintain their data centers. So by storing data, by keeping data, we actually put a lot of pressure on the earth and on the energy consumption that we all bring. So I do see the next wave in data not only becoming bigger, more data points, but also to become more smart on which data points we can actually get rid of, get rid of from a GDPR point of view, and how to become smart about managing our data, because growing that stack is not going to be friendly to our planet.
Well, I've got to say, I'm absolutely blown away from today's session. I think that's a great place to end. Thank you both so much for sharing your experiences, your journeys. I know, for one, that I am absolutely bowled over tonight and certainly have got a lot to think about. I hope everybody in the audience that joined us today feel the same. We've had some great questions, some great engagement, and this is a wrap for our live online career events with Shell. So thank you so much for being a part of it, Phil. And for Fleur, thank you everyone for joining the session. Big shout out to Chloe as well, who has helped orchestrate all of these together and given us the opportunity to work with all of you. So have a wonderful evening. You've certainly all got some food for thought, and yeah, we look forward to what you do next. Please do keep in touch. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for your involvement. See you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.